Is it recording?
Yes.
Welcome. Researchers have not determined the potential of the injured brain's language rehabilitation abilities. Evidence regarding the role of the right hemisphere in language recovery after a left hemisphere stroke has been inconsistent. I'm Amy Marshall. My research partner, Gianna Brandt, and I are exploring these uncharted areas of neurological potential. Under the leadership of Dr. Pradeep Ramanathan, Associate Professor in the Department of Speech, Language, and Hearing Sciences, the Brain Rehabilitation and Investigation of Neuroplasticity, BLAB, at California State University, East Bay, applies behavioral and neuroimaging methods in the investigation of cognitive, communicative function, and dysfunction in individuals with stroke, moderate to severe traumatic brain injury, or mild concussion. The Brain Lab investigates changes in hemispheric activation for object naming before and after training with dichotic auditory and split visual field stimuli to determine its potential utility as a therapeutic intervention for chronic aphasia. This technique is referred to as constrained hemisphere aphasia therapy, or CHAT.
Thank you, Amy. I will begin with a brief introduction to what aphasia is and anatomy of the brain. Networks for primary language processing, such as phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics, are located on the left-hand side of the brain for most people. The right hemisphere contains language networks that serve higher language functions, such as social and pragmatic language skills. Aphasia, the treatment focus of our study, is a language disorder that results from damage to networks of the brain responsible for primary language processing. Broca's aphasia, also called non-fluent aphasia, is a type of aphasia characterized by the decreased ability to produce language, often containing only core sentence components, such as nouns and verbs. The CHAT study is a single subject crossover design that takes advantage of brain lateralization, meaning the way that each brain hemisphere processes information from the opposite side of the body and world around us. Next slide. This image demonstrates how, while maintaining vision on the center fixation point, the stimulus in the left half of the visual field is delivered to the right visual processing area, and the stimulus in the right half of the visual field is delivered to the left visual processing area. This image shows how input heard on the right side will primarily be processed in the left hemisphere and vice versa. So CHAT protocol involves 4 dimensions. The first is the split visual field methodology. This is presented as stimuli on the left and right sides of the participant's visual field. The participant is asked to maintain gaze on the fixation point at the center of the screen while focusing their attention to the stimulus on the left. The second is dichotic listening, where auditory word stimuli corresponding to the images are respectively spoken into the right and left ears. To engage the auditory cortices of the right hemisphere, we ask the participant to focus on the auditory input of the left ear and ignore the right auditory stimulus. The third dimension is endogenous attentional downregulation. This dimension is asking the brain to ignore one half of the input. The participant is directed to focus on the right visual and auditory stimuli. This action will suppress the left hemisphere, thereby allowing the right hemisphere to take over input processing. The hemispheres communicate through a uniting structure called the corpus callosum and agree to activate the right visual and right auditory processing centers. Next slide. The last dimension of chat aims to activate the right side primary motor cortex. Using the left hand to input responses takes advantage of the organization of the primary motor cortex by activating the associated hand areas, which are located next to the associated areas responsible for movement of the mouth, encouraging the right hemisphere to take over. Here is an image of the motor homunculus. It is a map representing areas responsible for motor activity of the body. We see how the hand is very close to the mouth, providing motor influence.
Verb Network Strengthening Treatment, or VNeST, is a method that uses verbs to help patients or participants think of people who perform actions. By focusing on transitive verbs, neural networks activate and enable the participant to think of words associated with target verb. The verb and noun associations activate lexical retrieval. You will see to the left, or excuse me, my right, a figure of VNeST. So step 1 of the 6-step process, we will set cards down, point to each, and tell the participants that these cards say who and what. Who, dad, drive, what, which is boat. Then place the card with the verb written on it between the who and what cards. Ask who can, might, verb, something or someone. Use the verb drive and ask, can you think of a person who drives something? On step 2, read each triad of words aloud without conjugating the verb or adding articles to the nouns. Move the verb card up and down for each triad and encourage the participants to read aloud. Point to each word and read together if the participant cannot read independently. The participant selects one scenario generated from step 1. It's as part of step 3 and answers the WH questions, where, when, and why. Starting with the location is easiest for participants and constrains the event, which enables the participant to identify a reason for why and a time for when. For example, Dad drive boat, where would be in the bay behind our house. Why? To relax with family. When? Every Saturday. Steps 4 through 5. 1. Will the participant make semantic judgments about sentences read aloud? The participant is asked to recall the target verb independently. And then lastly, with 6, we repeat back to step 1, but this time without verbal cues. You will observe VNeST adapted onto E' in our next slide. The first section of the experiment employs 2 dimensions of chat, split visual field and dichotic listening. The participant is asked to decide if the sentence on the left makes sense. Visual stimuli are presented on the left and right sides of the center fixation point. Participants experience split visual field by maintaining their gaze on the centered fixation point while focusing their attention to the visual stimuli on the left. Simultaneously, auditory word stimuli corresponding to the images are respectively spoken into the right and left ears. Participants experience dichotic listening by focusing on the auditory input of the left ear and ignore the right auditory input. Focusing on the left auditory input engages the auditory cortices of the right hemisphere. The second section of the experiment employs VNeST step 1. The participant there is asked to identify who and type their response onto the screen. This is an adaptation of VNeST on E' software.
Fire, dried, water. Anchor, make, pottery. Rope. Boy, play, fetch. Dog, play, worms.
Lawyer, paint, water. Lawyer, paint, water. Lawyer, paint, water. Others swing road. Other swing road. Dog play fetch. Dog play fetch. Dog. Bird eat worms. Bird eat worms. Play bird.
Develop E-Prime proficiency while adapting VNeST methodology has been a considerable challenge. We are addressing how to construct several portals to receive type responses that address each WH question, determining how to maintain and transfer type responses to subsequent frames, and work out the quirks that interfere with image alignment. Why this work is important. Our career aspirations are to have an impact on this deserving community's quality of life. This research allows us to explore and expand on areas of developed neurological potential research. We hope to leave a lasting impact for future research and treatment. We would like to thank Dr. Ramanathan for his constant support, our colleagues for their wonderful collaboration, and the Center for Student Research for their financial support.
And lastly, if we can leave you with one thing today, it would be to carry with you awareness of aphasia. And we would like you to remember this quote if you encounter individuals with aphasia in the future. Not being able to speak is not the same as having nothing to say. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.